Helena donates blood to save the billionaire's daughter. And what happens next is unbelievable. Helena clutched the strap of her worn-out bag against her shoulder and took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. The sound echoed like a cathedral bell through what she imagined was an immense hall. Her fingers nervously adjusted the collar of the only blouse she owned, bought especially for this interview. The Archer mansion stood like a giant of stone and glass at the end of the city's most exclusive street. Helena had passed the main gate 3 times before working up the courage to announce herself. Now standing before the massive oak door, she questioned if she was truly ready for what was to come. The door swung open with a smooth motion, revealing a middle-aged woman in an impeccable uniform and a stern expression. "Mrs. Vance, I'm Martha, the housekeeper. Please come in. Mr. Archer requested that I welcome you and explain your duties." Helena nodded, crossing the threshold with hesitant steps. The interior was even more impressive than the facade, a hall with a double-height ceiling, marble floors that reflected the natural light pouring in from tall windows, and a curved staircase that seemed to float to the upper floor. "Wow," escaped her lips before she could stop it. Martha gave her a look that mixed understanding with a warning. "Impressive, isn't it? 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, a library, an office, a music room, a living room, a formal dining room, a family room, a main kitchen and a prep kitchen. Your responsibility will be to keep the bedrooms and social areas clean and organized. The bathrooms are also your responsibility." Eleanor swallowed hard. The list seemed endless, but she needed this job more than anything. "I understand. I can start right away." Martha seemed surprised by her determination. "Well, technically you've already started. The contract was signed yesterday. Come, I'll show you where we keep the cleaning supplies and the utility room where you can store your belongings." As she followed the housekeeper through the luxurious corridors, Helena noticed that despite all the opulence, there was something strange about the atmosphere. Everything was perfectly tidy, as if no one actually lived there. There were no photos on the walls, no forgotten toys, or any sign that a child inhabited the place. "Will Mr. Archer be home today?" Eleanor asked, trying to sound casual. "He works in the office at the end of the hall. He doesn't like to be disturbed. If you need anything, speak to me, never directly to him," Martha replied curtly. The utility room was small but clean, with a built-in closet and a simple mirror. Helena left her bag there and changed into the grey uniform provided by the housekeeper, simple, practical, and clearly designed to make her invisible. "We'll start upstairs. Little Sophie is at school now, so we can clean her room without interruptions," Martha explained as they climbed the stairs. The name piqued Elena's curiosity. "Sophie, how old is she?" 5. A quiet girl, not much trouble. After her mother passed away 2 years ago, she became even more withdrawn. Helena felt a tightness in her chest. A 5-year-old girl without a mother. Martha's casual comment contained an entire story of pain she knew all too well. Sophie's room was the first clue that a child lived in that house. Walls in a soft lavender shade, a bed with a delicate canopy, shelves with neatly organized books, and an impressive collection of porcelain dolls that looked as if they had never been touched. "Doesn't she play with the dolls?" Helena asked as she adjusted the already perfectly smooth bedspread. "Mr. Archer doesn't like a mess. Sophie knows she must keep everything in order." There was something deeply wrong with that statement. A 5-year-old girl who couldn't make a mess. Eleanor bit her lip to hold back a comment. For the next few hours, Helena followed Martha through the rooms of the mansion, absorbing instructions on specific products for each surface, cleaning methods for valuable antiques, and the exact routine she was to follow daily. Around noon, while cleaning the enormous living room windows, Helena heard the front door open and voices in the hall. One high-pitched and lively, the other deep and restrained. "Daddy, can I show you my drawing now?" "Sophie, I'm on an important call. Go to your room, okay? Martha will have your lunch ready soon." "But you promised you'd look." "Sophie." Just the name, spoken firmly. Helena discreetly moved closer to the door and glimpsed the scene. A tall man in an impeccable suit, a cell phone pressed to his ear, and a small blonde figure in a school uniform with a backpack, staring at the floor with slumped shoulders. Nicholas Archer was exactly as the business magazines portrayed him: perfectly styled dark hair, a defined jawline, impeccable posture. He exuded authority and, in that moment, coldness as well. Without another glance at his daughter, he turned and walked toward his office, his low voice continuing the discussion on the phone. Sophie stood still for a few seconds, a small statue of disappointment, before slowly climbing the stairs. Eleanor felt an urge to go after her, to offer the interested gaze her father had denied her, but she held back. It was her first day. She couldn't risk her job over feelings. She quickly returned to her work as Martha appeared. "I see you've met Mr. Archer," the housekeeper commented, "and Sophie is home. Finish these windows and then you can have lunch in the kitchen. In the afternoon, you will clean the office when he leaves for a meeting." As Eleanor resumed cleaning the windows, she couldn't stop thinking about the little girl alone in her room, that drawing no one would see, those downcast eyes no one would notice. It was during her brief lunch in the kitchen, a simple soup served by Martha, that Elena saw her again. Sophie appeared at the doorway, her curious blue eyes examining the stranger sitting at the kitchen table. "Hello," Elena said with a gentle smile. "You must be Sophie." The girl nodded, approaching cautiously. Her blonde hair was tied in a perfect braid, and her light blue dress didn't have a single wrinkle. She was like a porcelain doll that had come to life. "I'm Elena. I'll be helping to keep your house clean from now on." "Are you going to be here every day?" Sophie asked, her small voice revealing a barely contained hope. "Yes, Monday through Friday." A shy smile lit up the girl's face. "Do you want to see my drawing? I made it at school today." Before Elena could answer, Martha entered the kitchen with hurried steps. "Sophie, what are you doing in here? Your lunch is served in the dining room." "I just wanted to—" Sophie started, but stopped under the housekeeper's gaze. "Go back to the table, miss. Your father doesn't like you being in the kitchen." Sophie cast one last look at Elena before leaving, her small steps echoing down the hall. Martha turned to Elena with a serious expression. "Mr. Archer has strict rules about staff interactions with his daughter. It's best to keep your distance, Mrs. Vance." Elena nodded, but an uneasy feeling settled in her chest. She had seen something in that child's eyes, a loneliness too deep for someone so small. In the afternoon, when Nicholas Archer left for his meeting, Eleanor entered the office to clean it. It was an imposing room, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, and windows overlooking the impeccably manicured garden. Everything about it screamed power and control. As she carefully wiped down the desk, she noticed a photo in a simple silver frame, the only one in the entire house. It showed a beautiful woman with blonde hair and blue eyes, smiling with a baby Sophie in her arms. The resemblance between mother and daughter was striking. "That's my mommy." The soft voice startled Eleanor, who almost dropped the picture frame. Sophie was standing in the doorway watching her. "She was very beautiful," Elena replied softly, placing the photo back in its exact spot. "You look a lot like her." Sophie timidly entered the office, something she clearly didn't do often, judging by her hesitant steps. "Daddy said she went to live in heaven," she commented, her small fingers tracing the edge of the desk. "But sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like." Elena's heart ached. She knew this specific pain, this void that not even time could completely fill. She knelt to be at the girl's eye level. "You know, even when we don't remember someone's voice, we can feel their love right here," she said, lightly touching Sophie's chest, "like an invisible hug." The girl's eyes widened as if Elena had revealed an extraordinary secret. "Do you have someone in heaven too?" Sophie asked, with the direct curiosity only children possess. For a moment, the image of Lily flooded Eleanor's mind. Blonde hair like Sophie's, a contagious laugh, a life cut short so soon. She swallowed the lump in her throat. "Yes, I do. And I feel the invisible hugs every day." Sophie took a step forward, and Akatun, without warning, hugged Elena tightly. "Now you have a visible hug too." The unexpected gesture broke down the defenses Elena had been building since she first set foot in that house. She returned the hug gently, smelling the soft scent of children's shampoo and the purity of that contact. "Sophie, what are you doing in your father's office?" Martha's voice shattered the moment. Sophie pulled away quickly, her eyes wide as if she had been caught in some serious mischief. "I was just showing Elena the picture of Mommy," the girl explained. Martha shot a warning look at Elena. "Mrs. Vance, finish your cleaning, please. Sophie, it's time for your piano practice." When she was alone again, Elena realized her hands were trembling slightly. That small hug had stirred memories and feelings she had kept carefully locked away. But it had also planted something new, a connection with that lonely child in a house that was far too cold. She finished cleaning the office meticulously and moved on to the other rooms on the ground floor. Occasionally, she heard piano notes coming from somewhere in the house. Hesitant, precise, and joyless, Sophie practicing under strict supervision, no doubt. Late in the afternoon, as Elena was organizing the cleaning supplies in the closet, she heard the front door open and Nicholas Archer's firm footsteps echo through the hall. She kept busy, following Martha's advice to remain invisible. But something made her look down the hallway, and there he was, the man of the house, standing a few feet away, watching her with an unreadable expression. Up close, she noticed his eyes were a deep blue, almost grey, and there were lines of fatigue around them. "You're the new employee," he said, a statement, not a question. "Yes, sir, Elena Vance. I started today." He studied her for a moment, as if evaluating a potential acquisition. "Martha says you have good references. I expect you to adapt well to the rules of the house." Before Elena could respond, the sound of small, hurried footsteps filled the corridor. "Daddy!" "You're back!" Sophie ran toward her father, stopping at a respectful distance, as if she knew hugs were not welcome. She was holding a colorful piece of paper. "Look at my drawing, please. It's our house." Nicholas glanced briefly at the paper and nodded. "Very nice, Sophie. Now I have work to do in the office. Be a good girl." The sparkle in Sophie's eyes visibly dimmed, but she forced a smile. "Yes, Daddy." Eleanor watched the interaction with a lump in her throat. How could that man not see the hunger for approval in his daughter's eyes? How could he not notice the desperate love in that small figure? As Nicholas walked away toward his office, Eleanor saw Sophie remain in place, the drawing still in her hands, her smile slowly fading. "May I see your drawing?" Eleanor asked softly. Sophie's face lit up instantly. She approached, holding out the paper with pride. It was a colorful drawing of the mansion, with 3 figures in front, a tall one with dark hair, a small one with yellow hair, and a third, slightly apart, also with yellow hair and wings. "It's Daddy, me, and Mommy watching from heaven," Sophie explained. "And now I'm going to draw you too." Something warm and unexpected blossomed in Eleanor's chest. She smiled at the girl, feeling she had found a purpose in that house beyond cleaning immaculate surfaces. "I would love to be in your next drawing," she replied. As Sophie skipped away, Eleanor realized that despite the intimidating grandeur of the Archer mansion and the coldness of its owner, she had found an unexpected connection. The little blonde girl with eyes full of hope had touched something deep in her soul, something Elena had believed was dormant forever. As she put away the last cleaning product, she decided that, rules or not, she would be a presence in that child's life. Not just an invisible employee, but someone who truly saw her. The sun was beginning to set as Eleanor walked out of the Archer mansion's gates. Exhausted but with a new sense of determination, she would be back tomorrow, and tomorrow, maybe, she could bring a little more warmth to that house of marble and loneliness. The scream echoed through the mansion like a clap of thunder, tearing through the afternoon silence. Eleanor dropped her duster and ran toward the sound. Her heart pounded as she took the stairs 2 at a time. The voice was Sophie's, she was sure of it. Martha was also running down the hall, her usually impassive face now twisted with worry. "It came from her room," the housekeeper shouted. When they reached Sophie's bedroom door, the scene froze Elena's blood. The girl was on the floor, unconscious, a trickle of blood running from her temple. Next to her, toppled over, was the heavy bookshelf Nicholas had insisted on keeping in the room, despite Eleanor mentioning the danger weeks ago. "Sophie!" Eleanor knelt beside the girl, checking her breathing. She's breathing, but she won't wake up. Martha, call an ambulance. Now? As Martha rushed to the phone, Elena held Sophie's small, cold hand. It's going to be okay, sweetie. I'm right here with you. I won't leave your side. The minutes until the ambulance arrived felt like hours. Elena kept Sophie's head stabilized, murmuring words of comfort, even though the girl couldn't hear her. When the paramedics finally arrived, they practically had to pull Elena away from her. Are you the mother? One of the paramedics asked as they placed Sophie on a stretcher. No, I'm... Elena hesitated. What was she? A cleaner? That seemed so inadequate to describe what she felt for Sophie. I'm responsible for her at the moment. Her father is in a meeting. She needs to go to the hospital immediately. The blow to her head was severe. Elena nodded, grabbing Sophie's coat and her own purse. I'm going with her. Martha, please notify Mr. Archer immediately. On the way to the hospital, Elena held Sophie's limp hand in the ambulance, praying silently. How could this have happened? The girl had probably tried to reach a book on the higher shelves. The bookshelf wasn't secured to the wall, despite Elena's warnings. Her phone rang. It was Nicholas. What happened to my daughter? His voice was pure panic, something Elena had never heard before. We're on our way to St. Luke's Hospital. The bookshelf in her room fell on her. She's unconscious but breathing normally. Elena tried to keep her voice steady, but tears threatened to fall. I'm with her in the ambulance. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When they arrived at the hospital, the medical team was already waiting. Sophie was rushed away for tests, while Eleanor was left in the waiting room, feeling suddenly useless. Her hands trembled as she tried to fill out the admission forms with the little information she knew about Sophie. Nicholas arrived exactly as he had promised, his impeccable suit contrasting with his pale, distraught face. For the first time since Elena had met him, he looked completely vulnerable. Where is she? How is my daughter? His voice broke on the last word. Klaus, they're running tests. The doctor will come talk to us as soon as there's news, Elena replied, standing up. For a tense moment, they stood side by side, united by their concern for the little girl they both loved, each in their own way. An hour later, a middle-aged doctor with deep circles under his eyes approached them. Mr. Archer, I'm Dr. Bennett. Your daughter has suffered a severe head trauma. We need to operate immediately to relieve the intracranial pressure. His voice was grave but firm. There's also internal bleeding that we need to control. Nicholas turned even paler. Do whatever is necessary, doctor. There's an additional problem, the doctor continued. Sophie has an extremely rare blood type, AB negative. Our blood bank has limited supplies, and she'll likely need a transfusion during the surgery. We're contacting other hospitals, but we would save time if there's a compatible family member. What is her blood type? Elena asked, an idea forming in her mind. AB negative. Less than 1% of the population. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. That's my blood type. Both men turned to her, surprised. I can donate right now, Elena continued, rolling up her sleeve. How much do you need? Dr. Bennett looked relieved. We'll need to do a quick compatibility test, but if you're a match, it would be extremely helpful. Please, come with me. Nicholas grabbed Elena's arm before she followed the doctor. His eyes, usually cold and distant, now shone with something she had never seen before. Thank you, was all he said, but the word carried the weight of 1,000 emotions. Elena nodded and followed the doctor. The test confirmed the match, and minutes later she was lying on a gurney, watching her blood flow through a tube. She closed her eyes, remembering Sophie's smile, her small hands holding hers as they read stories together, the sound of her laughter, which had become more and more frequent in recent weeks. Please, be okay, Elena murmured. You have so much ahead of you, little one. When the donation was finished, Elena felt slightly dizzy but insisted on returning to the waiting room. Nicholas was there, sitting with his head in his hands. He stood up immediately when he saw her. You should be resting, he said, his usual authoritative tone gone for the first time. I'm fine. Any news? They just took her into surgery. It's going to take a few hours. Elena nodded and sat down, feeling her legs grow weak. To her surprise, Nicholas sat next to her, not at the other end of the room as she had expected. The next few hours passed in a blur of bitter coffee, silent prayers, and shared glances with Nicholas during moments of particular anxiety. Around midnight, Dr. Bennett finally appeared, looking exhausted but with a small smile. The surgery was a success. We managed to control the bleeding and relieve the pressure on her brain. Sophie is a fighter. Eleanor let out a sob of relief and felt Nicholas tremble beside her. Is she out of danger? His voice was hoarse. Oh, the next 24 hours will be critical, but I'm optimistic. Your daughter received the blood in time, and that made all the difference. The doctor looked at Eleanor with respect. Your donation arrived at the exact moment. Without it, we would have had to wait for blood from another hospital, and every minute counted. Nicholas was silent for a moment, absorbing the information. Then, to Elena's surprise, he covered his face with his hands and his shoulders began to shake. He was crying silently. Elena, moved by pure instinct, placed a hand on his shoulder. She expected him to pull away, to regain the facade of the unshakable man he always maintained, but he didn't. Instead, for a brief moment, his hand found hers and squeezed it tightly. When can we see her? Elena asked the doctor, giving Nicholas a moment to compose himself. She's in the pediatric ICU now. One of you can go in for a few minutes, just to see her. She's still under the effects of the anesthesia. Nicholas cleared his throat. Elena, you should go. I need a minute. Surprised by the request, Elena followed the doctor to the ICU. Sophie looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed, with tubes and monitors connected to her delicate body. Her blonde hair was partially covered by bandages. Eleanor approached carefully and touched her hand. I'm here, sweetie. You were so brave, and now you need to rest to get better soon. Your daddy and I are waiting for you. After a few minutes, Elena returned to the waiting room. Nicholas was standing, looking out the window at the night outside. He turned when he heard her footsteps. How is she? Sleeping peacefully. She looks like she's at peace. He nodded, a muscle twitching in his jaw. The doctor said you should go home and rest, Elena continued. I'll stay here tonight. No, Nicholas answered firmly. You've done more than enough. You donated blood. You're exhausted. I'll stay. With all due respect, Mr. Archer, you have a company to run tomorrow. I can adjust my schedule. And besides, Elena hesitated, then decided to be honest. I wouldn't be able to sleep at home knowing Sophie is here. Something in Nicholas's gaze shifted. He studied her for a long moment, as if truly seeing her for the first time. You really care about her, don't you? It's not just a job to you. Of course I care. Sophie is, Eleanor searched for the right word, or special. Nicholas ran a hand through his hair, a surprisingly human gesture for someone always so controlled. You saved her life today, he said, his voice low and intense. The doctor made that clear. Without your blood, without your quick action. He couldn't finish the sentence. So anyone would have done the same. No, not just anyone would have known the blood type, would have insisted on donating immediately. He took a step forward, his eyes fixed on hers. His voice, usually controlled, now overflowed with emotion. You saved my daughter, he said, almost in an intense whisper that carried more power than any shout. His hands trembled slightly as he raised them in a pleading gesture. Ask for anything, he continued, his voice rising, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Anything within my power, it's yours. Elena felt the weight of those words, the intensity of that gaze. She could ask for a raise, a promotion, even help to pay off the debts she still had from Lily's treatments. But none of that seemed important in that moment. I just want to keep my job, taking care of Sophie with dignity. That's all I ask. Nicholas blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. For a fleeting moment, something akin to admiration shone in his eyes. Consider it done, he replied, his voice softer than Elena had ever heard it. And Elena, thank you. Truly. That night, they both stayed at the hospital, taking turns keeping vigil by Sophie's bedside. And though neither of them realized it yet, something fundamental had shifted between them, a bond forged by Eleanor's blood and Nicholas's tears. uniting them in their love for the little girl who was fighting for her life. The hospital room, despite the staff's attempts to make it cozy, remained sterile. Sophie, lying in the bed surrounded by tubes and monitors, looked even smaller than her 5 years. Her once rosy cheeks were pale, and her blonde hair spread across the white pillow created a painful contrast. Eleanor adjusted the yellow daisies on the small table, Sophie's favorites. It was the 3rd day after the surgery, and the girl had woken up briefly a few times but was still groggy from the medication. The door opened, and Nicholas walked in. His impeccable suit couldn't hide the dark circles under his eyes, signs of the constant vigil he kept, dividing his time between the hospital and unavoidable meetings. "Any change?" he asked, approaching the bed. "She woke up an hour ago, had some water and went back to sleep," Elena replied. "The doctors say it's normal. Her body needs rest to recover." Nicholas nodded, looking at his daughter with a mixture of love, fear, and guilt. "You should go home and rest," he suggested. "You've barely left this room in days." "I'm fine. I'd rather be here when she wakes up again." A comfortable silence settled between them, something new. Since the accident, the invisible barrier separating employer and employee had become thinner. It was then that Sophie began to stir, her small fingers clutching the sheet. Her eyes opened slowly, trying to focus. "Daddy?" she called out in a weak voice. Nicholas immediately leaned over the bed, taking his daughter's hand. "I'm here, Princess." Sophie's blue eyes scanned the room until they found Eleanor. "Eleanor, too," the girl murmured, a small smile forming on her pale lips. "Yes, sweetie, we're both here with you," Elena replied, moving to the other side of the bed. Sophie closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength, then opened them again. "My head hurts," she said. "I know, Princess. You bumped your head, but the doctors took care of you. It will stop hurting soon," Nicholas explained, with a gentleness Elena had never heard in his voice before. "When can I go home?" Sophie asked. Nicholas looked at Elena, seeking help. "In a few days, sweetie," Elena answered gently. "First, you need to get stronger, eat well, get lots of rest." Sophie nodded slightly, then looked back at her father. "Daddy, when I go home?" She hesitated, biting her lip. "Can Elena stay with me, to take care of me?" The request took Nicholas by surprise. He looked at his daughter, then at Elena, then back at Sophie. "Elena is our housekeeper, Sophie. She has other responsibilities in the house." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "But she takes better care of me. I don't want to be alone with Martha. She never smiles." The girl's voice grew weaker. "Please, Daddy. I'm scared." The vulnerability in Sophie's words hit Nicholas like a physical blow. Elena could see the internal struggle on his face, the businessman used to keeping an emotional distance versus the father who had almost lost his daughter. "We'll see what we can do," he finally replied, stroking Sophie's hair. "Now get some more rest." Satisfied with the answer, Sophie closed her eyes again. Within minutes, her breathing indicated she had fallen asleep. Nicholas moved away from the bed and gestured for Eleanor to follow him into the hallway. Once outside, he ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Elena now recognized as a sign of his anxiety. "What do you think?" he asked, surprising her. He had never asked for her opinion before. "About taking care of Sophie during her recovery?" "Yes, it's an unusual request. You weren't hired to be a nanny." Elena took a deep breath. "Sophie has been through a trauma. It's natural for her to want someone around who she feels safe with." "And that someone is you, not me," Nicholas replied, a trace of bitterness in his voice. "It's not a competition, Mr. Archer. Sophie loves her father, but I'm the one who spends more time with her, who is there to listen to her stories, help with her homework, read to her before bed." Elena paused. "I can take care of her during her recovery. I don't mind taking on that responsibility." Nicholas studied her for a long moment. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why do you care so much about my daughter? It goes far beyond your duties." The question caught Elena off guard. How could she explain that Sophie's smile was like a ray of sunshine in her dark world since losing Lily? How could she say that every one of the girls' laughs filled a void she thought would be eternal? "Because Sophie is special," she answered simply. "And because I believe every child deserves to be cared for with love." Something in Nicholas's gaze softened. He nodded slowly. "All right. When Sophie is discharged, you will be responsible for her care during her recovery. We'll sort out the details of your new role and appropriate compensation." "Thank you, Mr. Archer." "Nicholas," he corrected, surprising her, "I think saving my daughter's life gives you the right to call me by my first name, at least when we're alone." 3 days later, Sophie was discharged from the hospital. Dr. Bennett gave Nicholas a detailed list of care instructions and restrictions for the coming weeks. "She'll need absolute rest for the first few days," the doctor explained. "No television, reading, or any activity that requires concentration. After that, we can gradually introduce light activities." The Archer mansion had been prepared for Sophie's arrival. On Elena's recommendation, the girl's room had been rearranged. The bed positioned so she could see the garden from the window, books and toys within reach, and the comfortable armchair where Elena would spend many hours. The bookshelf that had caused the accident had been removed, replaced by low secure shelves firmly attached to the wall. When the car pulled up to the mansion's entrance, Elena was waiting at the door. Sophie, still weak but visibly happy to be home, smiled when she saw her. "Come on, princess," Nicholas said, carefully lifting his daughter into his arms as if she were made of porcelain. "Straight to bed, doctor's orders." "Is Elena staying with me?" Sophie asked, the worry clear in her voice. "Yes, sweetie," Elena replied, coming closer to hold her hand. "I'll be right by your side." The relief on Sophie's face was immediate. She snuggled against her father's shoulder as he carried her up the stairs, with Elena following close behind. The first few days were the hardest. Sophie had frequent headaches and tired easily. Elena kept the room dimly lit, spoke in a low voice, and made up stories to distract the girl when the pain became more intense. Nicholas checked in regularly, despite his busy schedule. Elena noticed how he watched her interactions with Sophie, as if trying to learn something he had never been taught: how to show affection, how to comfort, how to simply be present. One afternoon, while Sophie was sleeping, Nicholas found Elena organizing the medications on the small table. "How is she today?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Better." She managed to finish all her soup at lunch and was awake for almost 2 hours, talking. "It's a good sign." Nicholas nodded, looking at his sleeping daughter. "You're good at this," he commented after a moment. "Taking care of her, knowing what she needs." Elena smiled faintly. "I've had some practice." She didn't elaborate, and Nicholas didn't ask. The silence between them was now punctuated by a mutual curiosity that neither was ready to explore. As the weeks went by, Sophie gained strength. The headaches subsided, and she began to get bored with her confinement. "Can I go to the garden today?" she asked one morning, as Elena combed her hair, which could finally be washed normally after the stitches were removed. "Let's ask your father. If he agrees, I think a little fresh air would do you good." Nicholas, surprisingly, not only agreed but cancelled a meeting to accompany them. The three of them went out to the garden together, Sophie walking slowly, holding both Elena's and her father's hands like a small bridge connecting them. They sat on a bench under the shade of a blossoming apple tree. Sophie took a deep breath, closing her eyes with pleasure as she felt the gentle spring sun on her face. "I miss the smell of the flowers," she said. Nicholas looked at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. "You like the garden that much?" "It's my favorite place," Sophie replied. "When I'm here, I feel like Mommy is close by." Eleanor saw the pain cross Nicholas's face. It was the first time Sophie had mentioned her mother in her father's presence since the accident. "Why?" Nicholas asked softly. "Because she loved flowers. Eleanor told me that people we love never really go away. They stay in places they loved, in things that made them happy." Sophie turned to her father. "That's true, isn't it, Daddy?" Nicholas glanced at Elena, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. "Yes, Princess, it's true." In the days that followed, Sophie continued to improve. First, short walks in the garden. Then, short reading sessions with Elena. Gradually, the color returned to her cheeks and her energy began to come back. A month after the accident, Dr. Bennett made a house call to assess Sophie's progress. Impressive, he declared after the examination. Her recovery is happening faster than we expected. No doubt, the excellent care she's receiving at home has made all the difference. Can I go back to school? Sophie asked eagerly. Not yet, young lady. 2 more weeks of light activities at home, then we can consider half days at school. Though disappointed, Sophie took the news well. At least Elena is still with me, right? The doctor smiled. That's up to your father. All eyes turned to Nicholas. For a moment, he seemed uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Of course she is, he finally answered. Elena will stay with you for as long as necessary. Sophie's smile lit up her face in a way that warmed Elena's heart. That night, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Elena found Nicholas in his office. He was standing by the window, looking out at the moonlit garden. Dr. Bennett left a new medication schedule, she said, placing a sheet of paper on his desk. Nicholas turned to her. Sophie is happy, he said, ignoring the topic of medication. Happier than I've seen her in a long time, maybe since. He didn't complete the sentence, but he didn't need to. So she's a strong child, Elena replied, and she has a lot of love to give. Yes, Nicholas agreed, his intense gaze fixed on Elena. And thanks to you, she's finally getting love back. The comment wasn't an accusation, but a statement of fact, perhaps even an acknowledgement of his own failings as a father. You love her too, Elena said softly. Sophie knows that, does she? The question held a vulnerability Elena had never imagined hearing from him. I'm not sure I know how to show it properly. After Catherine died, He shook his head. I didn't know how to be a father without her. You're learning now, Eleanor assured him. Sophie notices every little effort. The way you cancel meetings to be with her, how you take her to the garden, how you listen to her stories, that matters. In the days that followed, the routine in the Archer mansion underwent a subtle but significant transformation. Meals, once served in separate rooms, now took place together in the small family dining room, which had rarely been used before the accident. Sophie would sit between Elena and Nicholas, creating a picture that could easily pass for a family. The girl gained strength daily. Soon she was running through the garden, though Elena still supervised her closely. Her laughter, once rare in the mansion, now echoed through the halls with increasing frequency. One afternoon, Nicholas came home early and found Elena and Sophie in the garden. He hid partially behind a porch column, watching them unnoticed. Sophie was picking flowers under Elena's careful guidance, who explained the name of each one. The girl was lively, radiant, gesturing as she spoke, a very different version of the quiet, withdrawn child she had been before the accident. But it was Elena who captured his attention. The way she knelt to be at Sophie's level, how she listened intently to the girl's every word, how her face lit up with each small shared discovery. There was a naturalness, a genuine connection that Nicholas recognized he was incapable of replicating. "Daddy!" Sophie's voice interrupted his thoughts. The girl had spotted him and was now running toward him, a small bouquet of flowers in her hand. "Look what we made for you." Nicholas crouched down to receive the gift, aware of Eleanor's gaze upon them. "They're beautiful, Princess. Thank you. Elena taught me the names. This blue one is a forget-me-not. It means don't forget me. And this yellow one is a buttercup. It means charmed by you. Aren't the names pretty?" "Very pretty," Nicholas agreed, looking over Sophie's head at Elena, who was watching the scene with a restrained smile. In that moment, a certainty formed in his heart. His daughter was not only physically recovered but happier than ever before, and the woman who had made it possible, who had brought life back into his home, deserved much more than a simple thank you. Nicholas Archer had always had an eye for detail. It was part of what made him such a successful businessman, his ability to notice patterns, flaws and opportunities where others saw only the obvious. But in recent days, his observant eyes had started to notice something he never imagined he would. Elena. It wasn't as if she had changed. Elena had been the same since day one. Efficient, discreet, kind. What had changed was the way he saw her. On a Wednesday morning, Nicholas was in his office reviewing contracts when he heard laughter coming from the garden. He approached the window, moved by curiosity, and saw Elena and Sophie sitting on the grass, making flower crowns. His daughter, once so withdrawn and quiet, now gestured animatedly as she spoke, her face glowing with a joy he hadn't seen since Catherine was alive. But it was Eleanor who captured his gaze. She listened to Sophie with complete attention, as if the childish stories about fairies and princesses were the most fascinating in the world. Her tilted head, her eyes focused entirely on the girl, her genuine smile. There was a quality to this attention that Nicholas had never been able to offer his daughter, always divided between meetings, calls, and deadlines. "Mr. Archer." The voice of Martha, the housekeeper, broke his thoughts. "Mr. Davis is on line 3. Nicholas nodded but remained for a few more seconds watching the scene before returning to his desk. Throughout the entire call, part of his mind remained in the garden, with those two figures sitting in the sun. That evening at dinner, Nicholas watched Elena with new eyes. Since Sophie's recovery, she had joined them for meals, initially at the girls' request, and later because it felt natural to have her there. Elena wore a simple blue cotton dress, her brown hair tied in a loose bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance, and yet Nicholas found he couldn't look away. And then the frog said to the princess, "You promised me a kiss, not a push into the pond." Eleanor finished the story she was telling, and Sophie burst into laughter, nearly knocking over her juice glass. "Another one? Eleanor, tell another story," the girl pleaded, her blue eyes sparkling. "Sophie, let Elena finish her dinner," Nicholas intervened, though his tone was gentle. "Besides, you still have to eat your broccoli." Sophie made a face at the vegetable, but then Elena leaned in and whispered something in her ear. The girl giggled and began to eat her broccoli with surprising enthusiasm. "What did you tell her?" Nicholas asked, genuinely curious. Elena smiled, a small, discreet smile that, for some reason, made his heart beat faster. "I told her that broccoli are tiny trees, and she's a kind giant helping the forest by eating only the old trees so new ones can grow." Nicholas laughed, surprised by the simplicity and effectiveness of the strategy. "You always turn difficult things into something magical for her," he observed. "Children see magic in the world," Elena replied, her eyes meeting his for a moment before turning back to her plate. "Those sometimes they just need a little help finding it." That night, after Sophie was in bed, Nicholas found Elena in the library, organizing some children's books they had read that afternoon. "Do you have a moment?" he asked, remaining at the door. Elena looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." Nicholas entered the library, feeling strangely nervous. He, who negotiated million-dollar contracts without flinching, suddenly didn't know how to start a simple conversation. "Is Sophie asleep?" Elena asked, breaking the silence. "Yes. She asked me to check 3 times for monsters under the bed." Elena smiled. "She's been reading that book about magical creatures. I think the goblins made an impression." "You'd know how to handle that better than I would," Nicholas said, and there was no resentment in his voice, only a statement of fact. "Sophie is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have found you both," Elena answered, and there was a sincerity in her words that touched Nicholas deeply. He walked to the window, looking out at the garden now bathed in moonlight. "I've been thinking a lot about Sophie's future lately," he said after a moment. "About her education, her well-being, her happiness." Elena remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "She's happier than ever, and that's because of you." Nicholas turned to face her. "So I'd like you to officially take on the role of Sophie's nanny, not as a temporary position during her recovery, but as a permanent one." The surprise was clear on Elena's face. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nicholas replied, an almost pleading tone in his voice that he himself didn't recognize. "The salary would, of course, be adjusted, and you'd have a larger room closer to Sophie's. You would be responsible for her daily routine, taking her to school, supervising her extracurricular activities, and the house cleaning. We'll hire someone else for that. You are far more valuable as Sophie's caregiver than as a cleaner." Eleanor looked down at her hands for a moment, then raised her eyes to meet Nicholas's. "Yes," she said simply. "I would love to be Sophie's official nanny." A weight Nicholas hadn't even known he was carrying seemed to lift from his shoulders. He smiled, a genuine smile he rarely showed. "Thank you," he said, and the words carried more meaning than he could express. In the days that followed, the Archer mansion found a new rhythm. With Elena officially in charge of Sophie, the house felt more alive, more welcoming. The girls' laughter echoed through the halls, and even Martha, the stern housekeeper, seemed more relaxed now that she didn't have to try to manage the child's energy. Nicholas began coming home earlier. He told himself it was to spend more time with Sophie, but he couldn't deny that a part of him looked forward to those moments at the dinner table, hearing about their day, watching the interaction between Elena and his daughter, feeling part of something that looked more and more like a family. One afternoon he came home in the middle of the day, a rarity. He had forgotten some important documents and needed to pick them up before a meeting. The house was quiet, and he assumed Elena and Sophie were at the park or in a class. But as he passed the music room, he heard the soft sound of the piano. He stopped at the door, surprised by the scene. Eleanor was sitting at the piano, an instrument that had remained covered and silent since Catherine's death. Sophie was beside her on the bench, watching intently as Elena played a simple melody. "See how my fingers move," Elena explained patiently. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, like a dance? "Mommy played the piano too," Sophie said, her voice small but clear. Nicholas held his breath, expecting to see sadness on his daughter's face, but instead there was only a gentle nostalgia. "She played very well," Sophie continued. "Daddy said she could have been a professional pianist if she wanted to." Elena smiled gently. She must have loved music very much. "Yes," Sophie agreed. "So and now you're teaching me so I can play like her." Nicholas's heart ached. It had been so long since he'd heard Sophie talk about her mother with such ease, without the crushing pain that usually accompanied her memories. Eleanor looked up at that moment and saw him standing in the doorway. Their eyes met, and something silent passed between them, a recognition, a mutual understanding. "Daddy!" Sophie exclaimed, noticing his presence. "Come see! Elena is teaching me to play the piano like Mommy!" Nicholas entered the room, feeling an emotion he couldn't name. "I see that, Princess. It looks like you have a talent for it." "Elena says I have to practice a lot," Sophie said seriously. "But one day I'll play beautifully like Mommy. You'll see." Nicholas sat in a nearby armchair, completely forgetting the documents he had come for. "I'm sure you will, sweetie." He watched as Elena patiently guided Sophie's small fingers across the keys, teaching her a simple tune. There was something deeply touching about the scene, not just because his daughter was reconnecting with her mother's memory in a positive way, but because of the calm, steady presence that Elena represented in her life, in their lives. That night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Nicholas invited Elena for a glass of wine on the terrace. It was a mild spring evening, and the garden was fragrant with the scent of the night-blooming flowers Catherine had planted years ago. "Sophie told me about the piano lesson," Nicholas said, handing Elena a glass. "It was a surprise." "I didn't know you played." "Not very well," Elena admitted, accepting the glass with a smile. "I learned a little when I was a child. I only know the basics." "More than I ever knew," Nicholas replied. He hesitated, then added, "It means a lot to me that you did that." Helping Sophie connect with her mother's memory in a positive way. Elena took a small sip of wine before answering. "Sophie needs to know that it's okay to remember, to miss someone, but also to move on. That her mother's memory can be a source of joy, not just pain." Nicholas studied her for a moment, intrigued by the wisdom in her words. "You speak like someone who's been through it." A faint shadow crossed Elena's face, so subtle he almost missed it. "We all lose people we love at some point," she replied softly. There was something in her tone that hinted at a deeper territory, an untold story. But Nicholas didn't press. Instead, he changed the subject. "Sophie seems to be adjusting well to her new school routine." Eleanor's face lit up. "Yes, she is. Her teachers say she's participating more in class, making friends. It's like she's finally coming out of her shell." "Thanks to you," Nicholas said, holding her gaze. You brought something to this house that I didn't know was missing. Elena blushed slightly and looked away toward the garden. Sophie is a wonderful child. She just needed a little space to shine. And someone who truly saw her, Nicholas added, his voice softer. Someone who saw beyond the businessman's daughter, the girl who lost her mother. Someone who just saw Sophie. Eleanor looked at him then, and there was an intensity in her eyes that surprised him. Sometimes we all need to be truly seen, she said. Something in those words resonated deeply with Nicholas. For a moment, he felt as if Elena could see him too. Not the billionaire, not the widower, not the distant father, but simply the man he was, with all his flaws and strengths. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. There was a new intimacy between them, born of nights like this, of simple conversations about Sophie, about music, about the flowers in the garden. Nicholas realized he hadn't spoken so much about everyday things with a woman since Catherine, and the realization left him momentarily speechless. "It's getting late," Elena said finally, placing her glass on the small table between them. "I should get some rest. Sophie wants to visit the zoo tomorrow, and I'll need all my energy to keep up with those tireless little legs." Nicholas laughed. "She's been talking about this outing for days. She's prepared a list of all the animals she wants to see, in alphabetical order." "I know. She showed me the zoo map with the most efficient route, all colored in and with stars for her favorites." Eleanor smiled fondly. "She has your methodical organization." "And where does she get her imagination?" Nicholas asked, tilting his head. Eleanor surprised him with a light laugh. "Maybe that's just Sophie being Sophie. Some qualities are simply our own. They don't have to be inherited or learned." Nicholas reflected on that as he watched her stand up, her graceful silhouette against the starry sky. "Good night, Elena," he said softly. "Good night, Nicholas," she replied, and the sound of his name on her lips felt strangely intimate. After she was gone, Nicholas remained on the terrace for a long time, sipping his wine, his thoughts a confusing whirlwind. Something was happening inside him, a subtle but undeniable shift. The woman he had hired to clean his house, who had saved his daughter's life, who now guided Sophie with such grace and wisdom, was beginning to occupy a space in his thoughts that went far beyond her professional role. It was uncharted territory, one he hadn't planned on exploring again. After Catherine's death, Nicholas had decided his romantic life was over. His focus would be on business and raising Sophie. There was no room for anything else. But now, looking up at the stars that dotted the night sky, Nicholas wondered if maybe, just maybe, life had other plans for him. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. As autumn arrived, the leaves in the Archer Mansion's garden began to turn golden, creating an orange carpet that made Sophie jump with joy on her way to school. The routine that once felt strange now flowed naturally. Elena making breakfast while Nicholas reviewed documents at the kitchen table, and Sophie excitedly recounted her dreams from the night before. On that Saturday morning, Nicholas surprised everyone by coming downstairs wearing jeans and a casual sweater instead of his usual suit. "No meetings today?" Eleanor asked, raising her eyebrows as she served pancakes to Sophie. "Cancelled everything," he replied, pouring himself some coffee. I thought we could do something together." Sophie nearly spilled her juice in her excitement. "Can we go to the amusement park? Please, please, please." Nicholas looked at Elena, an amused smile on his lips. "What do you think? Can you handle a roller coaster first thing in the morning?" "If Sophie can, so can I," Elena replied, returning his smile. There was something different in the air when their eyes met lately. A spark, an unspoken promise. The park was crowded, but Nicholas didn't seem to mind the lines or the people who occasionally recognized him. All his attention was divided between Sophie, who skipped from one ride to another, and Elena, who walked beside him, her arm occasionally brushing against his. "Look, Daddy, a haunted house. Let's go in." Sophie pointed to a dark structure decorated with fake spiderwebs and skeletons. "Are you sure, Princess? It looks pretty scary," Nicholas said, feigning concern. "I'm not scared," Sophie stated with determination. Elena will hold one of my hands, and you'll hold the other. Something about the simplicity of that childish logic touched Nicholas deeply. This was how his daughter saw the world now, a place where she was safe because she had two strong hands to hold her. Inside the haunted house, amidst screams and laughter, Nicholas found himself holding not only Sophie's hand but also Elena's, when a ghost suddenly jumped out. The touch lasted only a few seconds, but the feeling of their fingers intertwined stayed with him long after they left the attraction. Late in the afternoon, exhausted but happy, they stopped for a snack. Sophie devoured a cotton candy, while Nicholas and Elena shared a portion of fries. "I can't remember the last time I had this much fun," Nicholas commented, watching Sophie, who was now entertained by a small fishing game. "You deserve more days like this," Elena replied softly. "Away from the office, just being a dad. It's easier with you around," he admitted, his eyes meeting hers. "You taught us how to be a family again." Elena looked down, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You were always a family. I just maybe helped you rediscover it." The drive home was quiet, with Sophie asleep in the back seat, cuddling the giant teddy bear Nicholas had won for her in a ball toss game. "She's going to sleep like a rock tonight," Elena commented, looking back fondly. "And so are we, probably," Nicholas laughed. "I didn't remember that being a full-time dad was so exhausting. But it's worth it, isn't it?" Elena asked. Nicholas glanced at her briefly before turning his eyes back to the road, every second. That night, after putting Sophie to bed, Nicholas found Elena on the back terrace. She was wrapped in a light shawl, watching the stars begin to dot the dark sky. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, offering her a glass of wine. Elena accepted the drink with a smile. "I was just thinking about how life takes unexpected turns." Nicholas sat in the chair next to her. "Like you ending up working for a grumpy billionaire and his daughter?" She laughed. "You're not that grumpy." "Not anymore, at least. All credit goes to you," he replied, his tone more serious now. "This house, it was just a place where we slept and ate before you came. Now it's a real home." The silence that followed was comfortable, full of unsaid possibilities. Nicholas watched Elena's profile against the night sky, the gentle curve of her neck, the way her fingers delicately held the wine glass. There was a natural grace about her that fascinated him more and more. "Sophie adores you," he said finally. "I haven't seen her this attached to anyone since Catherine." A shadow seemed to cross Elena's face, so briefly he almost missed it. "She's a special child," Elena replied. "She has an incredible capacity to love, despite everything she's been through." "How do you do it?" Nicholas asked suddenly. "Understand so well what she needs, what she feels." "Sometimes it seems like you can read her mind in a way I never could." Elena was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on some distant point in the garden. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nicholas continued, his voice softer. "Since the accident, I've noticed how you connect with Sophie in a almost motherly way. It's as if there's something deeper behind your affection for her." Elena's hand tightened on her glass, and Nicholas realized he had touched on something important. "I'm sorry," he hurried to say. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy." "No?" Elena shook her head slightly. "It's okay." "It's a fair question." She took a sip of wine, as if gathering courage, then placed the glass on the table between them. When she looked at Nicholas again, there was a vulnerability in her eyes he had never seen before. "I once had a daughter," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "Lily? She was 4 when—" Eleanor stopped, visibly fighting the emotion rising in her throat. Nicholas felt his heart clench. He wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, but something kept him still, respecting the space she needed to continue. "She was hit by a car," Elena continued, tears starting to form in her eyes. "We were walking home from preschool. I let go of her hand for a second to get something from my purse, and she saw a puppy across the street." Her voice failed. "Elena, I'm so sorry," Nicholas said, his own voice thick with emotion. She wiped away a tear that was trickling down her face. "It was 3 years ago. The doctors did everything they could, but—" She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. "Sophie reminds me of her, not just physically, Though they're both blonde with light eyes, it's something in her personality, the way she looks at the world with such curiosity and joy. Nicholas finally reached out, covering her hand with his. The contact seemed to break something in Elena, and the tears now flowed freely down her face. I once had a daughter. She was hit by a car and died as a child. Sophie reminds me of her, Elena confessed, the words coming out between choked sobs. Nicholas felt a lump form in his own throat. So many things made sense now. The immediate connection between Elena and Sophie, the way she knew exactly what to do during the girl's recovery, her infinite patience, her instinctive knowledge of how to comfort a child. "That's why you donated blood without hesitating," he said softly. "You couldn't save Lily, but you could save Sophie." Elena nodded, unable to speak. Nicholas got up from his chair and knelt beside her, wrapping her in a gentle hug. It was the first time they had touched like this, a gesture that transcended the employer-employee relationship and entered a more personal, more intimate territory. "Thank you for sharing that with me," he said against her hair. "How it must have been unbearably painful." "Sometimes it still is," Elena admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. "But being with Sophie, it helps somehow, as if a part of Lily is still here, in a way." Nicholas pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "Sophie is very lucky to have you in her life. And so am I." Something shifted between them in that moment. An invisible barrier fell, revealing a deeper, truer connection. When Elena finally calmed down, they sat side by side in a comfortable silence, watching the stars and occasionally sharing memories, Nicholas about Catherine, Elena about Lily. In the days that followed, Nicholas began to rearrange his schedule to spend more time at home. For the first time since taking over the family company, he delegated important projects, turned down unnecessary trips, and came home in time for dinner almost every day. The evenings became his favorite time, the three of them in the living room, Sophie on the rug drawing or playing with her dolls, while he and Elena talked about their day, shared books, or simply enjoyed each other's company in comfortable silence. On one of those nights, while Sophie was already asleep, Nicholas found Elena in the library, looking through a photo album. "Are these pictures of Lily?" he asked softly, sitting beside her on the sofa. Elena nodded. "She would have turned 7 today," she said, her voice calm despite the pain in her eyes. "I always look at her pictures on her birthday." Nicholas looked at the smiling girl in the photographs, curly blonde hair, bright blue eyes, a smile that lit up her little face. The resemblance to Sophie was undeniable. "She was beautiful," he said. "She was," Elena agreed, gently running her fingers over a photo of Lily on a swing, laughing at the camera. Full of life. She loved music, dancing. She was always singing something. "Like Sophie," Nicholas observed. Elena smiled through her tears. "Yes, like Sophie." Nicholas put his arm around her shoulders, and Elena leaned against him, allowing herself to be comforted. There was a new intimacy between them now, born from shared pain and mutual understanding. "Tomorrow," Nicholas said softly, "we could take flowers to her grave if you'd like. The three of us together." Elena looked at him, surprise and emotion mixed in her gaze. "You would do that?" "Of course," he replied, holding her hand. "Lily is important to you, so she's important to us too." The tears came again, but this time there was gratitude mixed with the sadness. "Thank you," Elena whispered. When she finally stood up to go to bed, Nicholas walked her to her bedroom door. There was something he wanted to say, something that had been growing inside him for weeks, but the words felt insufficient, inadequate for the moment. Instead, he leaned in and gently kissed her forehead. "Good night, Elena." "Good night, Nicholas," she replied, her eyes meeting his with a new depth. Back in his own room, Nicholas stood before the photograph of Catherine on his nightstand. "I think you would have liked her," he said quietly to the image of his late wife. "So she takes such good care of our little girl." For the first time in 3 years, he didn't feel guilty at the thought of moving on. Instead, there was a sense of peace, as if Catherine was somehow giving her silent blessing. The next morning, Nicholas woke to the sound of laughter coming from the kitchen. He found Sophie and Elena making pancakes together, Flour dusted across the counter and on both of their cheeks. "Daddy!" Sophie exclaimed when she saw him. "We're making breakfast. Elena is teaching me the secret way to make perfect pancakes." "And what's the secret?" he asked, accepting the cup of coffee Elena offered him. "Love," Sophie replied, laughing. "Elena says it's the most important ingredient." Nicholas looked at Elena over his cup, and something silent passed between them, a recognition, a promise, a possibility. In that moment, he knew for certain that the Archer mansion had finally become a true home, and that the woman before him had become much more than his daughter's nanny. She had become the heart of the house, and perhaps if he was brave enough to admit it, his heart as well. It was on an ordinary morning that the realization hit Elena like a cold wave. She was making breakfast, moving through the Archer mansion's kitchen with the familiarity of someone who knows every corner, every drawer, every preference of its inhabitants. Sophie was chattering about her school science project, while Nicholas read the newspaper, occasionally looking up to smile at his daughter or to share a knowing glance with Eleanor. It was a perfect domestic scene, and that was exactly the problem. Elena placed the plate of pancakes on the table and felt a tightness in her chest as she watched Sophie automatically cut a piece and offer it to Nicholas to taste, just as Elena did when she cooked something new. The gesture, so small and innocent, illustrated with painful clarity how much she had infiltrated the Archer family dynamic. "So is everything all right, Elena?" Nicholas asked, noticing her expression. "Yes, just... I remembered I need to call the plumber about that faucet in the guest bathroom," she improvised, forcing a smile. Throughout breakfast, Elena couldn't shake the disturbing thought. She had crossed invisible lines. She had mistaken her role in this house. She was not Sophie's mother. She was not Nicholas's wife. She was the nanny, an employee, no matter how close they had become in recent months. The memory of Lily weighed on her heart. Was she using Sophie as a substitute for the daughter she had lost? And Nicholas, the looks, the late-night talks, the moments of near intimacy they had shared. Was she allowing herself to dream of something she could never have? After taking Sophie to school, Eleanor spent the rest of the morning reorganizing the girls' closet, a mechanical task that allowed her to think. The pain of losing Lily had lessened since she had entered the Archers' lives, but now Elena recognized a new danger, the fear of losing this new happiness she had found. Life had already taught her that nothing is permanent, that families can be destroyed in seconds, that love and security are fragile states, easily broken by a cruel fate. "I'm getting too attached," she murmured to herself, folding a small t-shirt. "I'm confusing things." The logical solution came with painful clarity. She needed to pull away before it was too late, before Sophie got even more attached to her, before her feelings for Nicholas grew beyond what she had already allowed, before she suffered the devastating pain of loss again. In the days that followed, Elena began to implement her plan without anyone noticing. Small distances, delegating tasks she would normally do with Sophie to Martha, the housekeeper, avoiding the late-night conversations with Nicholas, gently declining invitations to family dinner, claiming fatigue or correspondence to catch up on. It was like building an invisible wall brick by brick, day by day. The hardest part was seeing the confusion in Sophie's eyes when she said, "I can't read with you tonight, sweetie," or "Maybe your dad can take you to the park today." On Friday, while Sophie was at school, Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed in her room, an envelope in her hands. Inside was a carefully worded resignation letter, explaining that she needed to move on, that she had received an offer she couldn't refuse in another city, gentle lies to ease the separation. Her gaze wandered around the room she had occupied for the past few months. It was larger and more comfortable than the initial utility room, personally chosen by Nicholas when she officially became Sophie's nanny. The soft green walls, the light curtains that danced with the morning breeze, the small desk where she had often planned activities for Sophie. Everything exuded a sense of belonging that made her heart ache at the thought of leaving it behind. On the shelf above the bed, a small silver frame held a picture of Lily. Next to it, there was now another, Sophie on her birthday, smiling brightly as she blew out the candles. with Nicholas and Elena by her side, forming an almost family portrait. Eleanor picked up both photos, studying the girls' faces. So similar and yet so different. Lily, forever frozen at 4 years old, would never grow up, never change. Sophie was constantly evolving, her face losing its baby features, her personality blossoming a little more each day. "I can't replace you," Elena whispered to Lily's image. "And I can't pretend that Sophie is mine." The decision was made. She would speak to Nicholas that night after Sophie was asleep. 2 weeks would be enough to find a suitable replacement, to prepare for the transition, to say goodbye. When Nicholas's car arrived earlier than usual, Elena was in the garden, lost in thought as she watered the flowers. She didn't hear him approach until he spoke. "Have you been avoiding me and Sophie?" Elena nearly dropped the watering can in shock. She turned to find Nicholas standing just a few feet away, his intense eyes fixed on her, his expression a mixture of concern and something that looked like hurt. "Of course not," she replied automatically, but her tone lacked conviction. "Sophie asked if you were angry with her," Nicholas continued, taking a step forward. "She said you've barely hugged her this week." Guilt hit Elena like a physical blow. "I would never, ever be angry with Sophie." "Then what's going on? Because something clearly is." Eleanor looked away, unable to face the intensity in his eyes. How could she explain the whirlwind of emotions tormenting her? How could she say she was pulling away precisely because she cared too much? She began, but the words felt inadequate. "I think maybe I've overstepped some boundaries." Nicholas frowned. "What boundaries?" "My role here, I'm Sophie's nanny, not—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "So I'm not her mother, not part of the family." The silence that followed was heavy with tension. When Elena finally found the courage to look at Nicholas, she saw an expression she couldn't decipher. "Is this about Lily?" he asked softly. The mention of her daughter's name made Elena's eyes burn with unshed tears. "It's about everything. About getting too attached to Sophie, confusing things, creating expectations that aren't realistic." "What expectations?" Elena let out a shaky breath. "Of belonging. Of being a part. Of—" She stopped, unable to complete the thought that would include her growing feelings for him. Nicholas took another step toward her, closing the distance between them. "Then what if I told you that you do belong here, that you are part of our family now?" Eleanor's heart raced, but fear spoke louder. "That would be kind of you, but it wouldn't be true. At the end of the day, I'm an employee, one who has become far too emotionally involved." "Is that such a bad thing?" His voice was almost a whisper. "It's dangerous," Elena replied, feeling the first tear escape. "Because when I leave—" "Leave," Nicholas interrupted, alarmed. "You're thinking of leaving us." The truth slipped out before she could stop it. "I was considering it. I thought it would be for the best." Nicholas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Eleanor recognized as a sign of his agitation. "Care best for whom exactly? Because it certainly wouldn't be better for Sophie. Or for me." Something in the intensity of his words made Elena pause. "Nicholas, No," he interrupted again, his voice firmer now. "Before you say anything else, I need you to listen to me. When Catherine died, something inside me died too. I existed, I worked, I breathed, but I wasn't really living, not even for Sophie, though I loved her more than anything. I was numb." Elena remained silent, sensing he had needed to say this for a long time. "And then you came along," Nicholas continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "First, you literally saved Sophie's life with your blood. Then you saved her again by bringing joy, security and love into her daily life, and without me even realizing it—" He paused, his voice cracking slightly. "You didn't just save my daughter's life. You saved mine too." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning and emotion. Eleanor felt more tears escape, unable to hold them back in the face of the vulnerability Nicholas was showing. "You brought us back to life, Eleanor," he continued. "You turned this cold mansion into a home. You taught us how to be a family again. How can you think you've overstepped boundaries by doing that?" "I'm scared," Elena admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Just scared of giving in to these feelings and then losing everything all over again. I don't know if I would survive it. Nicholas closed the distance between them and gently placed his hands on her shoulders. Fear is natural. I'm scared too. But after losing so much, I've learned that we have to cherish what we have while we can. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted the moment. Sophie came running through the garden, just home from school, her usually cheerful face marked by an expression of distress. "Martha said you're leaving," the girl exclaimed, stopping in front of Elena, her blue eyes wide and full of tears. "Is it true?" Elena shot an accusing glance at Nicholas, who seemed equally surprised. Martha must have found the letter in her room. "Sophie, Elena knelt to be at the girl's eye level, her heart clenching at the fear on her small face. "Please don't go," Sophie pleaded, tears now streaming freely down her cheeks. "I promise to be better behaved. I promise to clean my room every day. I promise to never spill juice on the carpet again." "Oh, sweetie," Elena wrapped her in a tight hug, feeling the little girl tremble with sobs. "It's not about any of that. Then why?" Sophie pulled back to look her in the eyes, her face a mask of confusion and pain. "Don't you like us anymore?" "I love you," Elena replied without thinking, the words coming straight from her heart. "I love you so much." "Then stay," Sophie said simply, with the direct logic of a child. "I stay with us forever." Elena looked up and met Nicholas's gaze, his eyes also shining with restrained emotion. He knelt beside them, forming a small circle in the middle of the garden. "I think we all want the same thing," he said softly. "You belong here, Elena, with Sophie. With me." He paused meaningfully before adding, "with us." The weight of the moment did not escape Elena. This wasn't just her employer asking her to keep working for him. This was a man for whom she had developed deep feelings, asking her to consider something more. "I'm so scared," she confessed, looking from Sophie to Nicholas. "Of giving into this and then—" "Life doesn't come with guarantees," Nicholas said gently. "Believe me, I know that better than most. But what we have here, the three of us, is too special to give up on out of fear." Sophie, now calmer, but still clinging to Elena's hand, looked at her with those big blue eyes. "Please, Elena, don't go." In that moment, looking at this child who had entered her heart like a ray of sun after the darkest storm, and at the man whose quiet strength and vulnerability had captivated her against all her defenses, Elena felt something shift inside her. The fear didn't disappear, maybe it never would completely be, but alongside it grew something stronger, the understanding that love, even with all its risks, was the only thing that truly mattered in the end. "I'll stay," she said finally, her voice firmer despite the tears. "I'll stay with you." Sophie's face lit up like a small sun, and she threw herself into Elena's arms with a cry of joy. Nicholas placed a hand on Elena's shoulder, a gentle but promising touch. That night, after Sophie had finally fallen asleep, not without making Elena promise 5 times that she would be there in the morning, Nicholas found her on the terrace, watching the stars. "Are you sure?" he asked, joining her on the garden bench. "About staying?" Elena looked at him, really looked, allowing herself to see not just the handsome, powerful man the world knew, but also the dedicated father, the widower struggling with his grief, the vulnerable and strong man who had found the courage to open his heart again. "I am," she replied simply. "I don't know exactly what the future holds for us, but I know I want to find out." Nicholas smiled, that rare, genuine smile she had grown to cherish. Slowly, as if giving her time to pull back if she wanted, he reached out and intertwined his fingers with hers. "One day at a time," he suggested. Elena nodded, returning his smile. That one day at a time, sitting there under the stars, with Nicholas's hand holding hers and the knowledge that Sophie was sleeping peacefully upstairs, Eleanor felt the fear recede a little more. Maybe attachment wasn't something to be feared, after all. Maybe it was exactly what she needed to finally heal the wounds of the past and embrace the future. A future that, against all odds, included a second chance to love and be loved. The garden of the Archer mansion glowed under the spring sun. Roses bloomed in bursts of color. Lavender scented the air, and the sky was a blue so perfect it looked painted. Sophie ran among the flower beds, chasing a yellow butterfly, her crystalline laughter echoing through the property. Elena watched from the terrace, a cup of tea in her hands and a soft smile on her lips. A year had passed since Sophie's accident, 10 months since she had officially become the girl's nanny, and 3 months since she had almost left out of fear of getting too attached. "I've never seen her so happy." Nicholas's voice startled her slightly. He came closer, stopping beside her to watch his daughter, who was now kneeling to examine something on the ground with intense concentration. "She's trying to convince a ladybug to climb onto her finger," Elena explained. For the science presentation next week, they laughed together, a harmonious sound that blended naturally, as if they had been sharing laughter their whole lives. The silence that followed was comfortable, full of small things unsaid, but felt. In the last few months, since the night Eleanor had decided to stay, something had shifted between them. The glances lasted a little longer. The casual touches carried more meaning. "Eleanor," Nicholas said finally, his voice softer than usual, "there's something I've been wanting to talk to you about." She turned to him, noticing the seriousness in his eyes. "It sounds important." "It is." He paused as if gathering his thoughts. "Since you came into our lives, everything has changed. This house was just a place we lived. Now it's a home. Sophie was a quiet, sad child. Now she's flourishing. And I—" He met her eyes. "I was just existing, but now I'm living again." Eleanor's heart raced. There was an intensity in his gaze that left her breathless. "When Catherine died, I thought I would never feel anything like love again, that part of my life was over forever." His voice was low, almost a whisper. "And then you appeared, first as a discreet presence, then as the woman who saved my daughter, and finally as someone indispensable. Someone who makes me want to be a better person." Nicholas took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I know our beginning was unusual. I know there are complications. Your grief over losing Lily, my grief over losing Catherine. But I also know that what has happened between us is rare and precious." Eleanor felt tears forming. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the risks of loving and losing again. But another part, the one that had grown stronger in recent months, wanted to believe that second chances were possible. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But I've also never felt so at home as I do with you and Sophie." Nicholas's smile lit up his face. "Sophie and I were talking last night. She asked me why you weren't officially part of our family yet." Just then, Sophie noticed the serious conversation happening on the terrace and ran toward them, her cheeks flushed from the sun and the running. "Are you talking about us being a real family?" she asked, looking from one to the other with expectation. Nicholas knelt to be at his daughter's level. "Yes, Princess. I'm telling Elena how we feel about her." Sophie looked at Elena, her blue eyes shining with childish hope. "Are you going to say yes? Please." Elena felt her heart overflow with emotion. This blonde child who reminded her so much of Lily, yet who was unique in her own way, had become as important to her life as the air she breathed. And the man beside her, with all his strength and vulnerability, had found his way into her heart, despite all her defenses. Nicholas stood up again, standing next to Sophie. They both looked at Elena, awaiting her answer. "We can try to be a family," Nicholas said softly, looking directly into Eleanor's eyes. "Sophie and I are both very fond of you." The simplicity of those words broke down the last barriers Eleanor had built around her heart. A future she had never imagined possible after losing Lily now opened up before her, not to replace what she had lost, but to build something new, equally precious. "Yes," she answered, her voice choked with emotion, but firm in its conviction. "I would like that very much." Sophie's face lit up with pure joy. She launched forward, hugging Elena tightly. Nicholas joined them, his arms wrapping around them both, creating a perfect circle of connection. There they were, in the spring garden, united in a hug that symbolized everything they had built together, no longer employer, employee and daughter, but a family forged by pain, by healing, and above all, by the love they had found in each other when they least expected it. The unbelievable had happened. In the midst of pain, grief, and loss, three wounded hearts had found each other, and together had created something new and beautiful, a family built on love. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.